Lovers Football Betting Contest Countdown Show, Week 15 of the NFL season. He is LVC, I'm Adam Chernoff, and it is the week before Christmas when things get awfully interesting in Survivor and usually signals the end of the season for the Circa Million contest. But we have the elusive Week 18 looming this season to give us an extra week that takes us well into January. So not quite there yet. And as you can see in the background, I like the new touches you have in the room there. 2 checks from last season, just showing off a little bit. A cool.
No, I can't get the green screen to work. I can't get the green screen to work, so it's better than looking at a green screen, isn't it?
When you picked up those checks last year for your 2nd and 5th place finishes, were you able to fit them in the car, or like how do you get those home?
Yeah, you know what? They were a lot harder to fit than you would have thought. Luckily, I think it's because I had a convertible. I don't think we could get it in the regular car. I think I had to do it in the convertible.
So you dropped the top, put the checks in the back seat. You had the cash in the front seat, driving home with more than $250,000, and we're just cruising down the strip. That's how it works for LVC in day-to-day life.
Yeah, it's just blowing out everywhere. I lost it all too.
Well, I'm going to be honest. We might lose a little bit of it here when it comes to predictions this week because we're at 80-plus COVID list additions in the last 72 hours. We've seen 8, 9, 10-point moves, a number of different spots across the board. Every week we seem to say that, well, this week is brutal to predict. But when it comes down to week 15, I mean, I don't even know where to start with what we're dealing with this week. As complicated of a week as there has been this season, no question about it, right?
Yeah, this is ridiculous.
I don't know. It's a mess. Before we came on, we were waiting for the lines. Luckily, Cirque was able to adjust for Washington, Philly, because in the last 20 minutes, that game's moved the field goal.
Yeah, and that's even low, isn't it?
It's low now, and that number's still going up. But I'm looking at the screen now, and there's 5 different games that are being lit up. And it's not because it's the Thursday morning rush. It is because it is the now Thursday morning COVID news drop.
Well, here's one consideration. You have to field, you mentioned it on your podcast this morning. What is it, 46 people?
Right.
Right. So if Washington has to forfeit, that means you have no chance at a point. So, buyer beware with taking the Redskins this week.
So that automatically gives Philly the cover in the contest, or what's the rules on that? Because that's sort of uncharted territories on the forfeit.
Yeah, the rule is they changed it. The previous rule was that if your game was canceled, nobody got points.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not a good rule. They changed it to if a team forfeits, the team that forfeited, you get 0 points, and the team that won by forfeit gets 1 point.
Interesting.
Which I don't care for that rule either, because it's a little bit predictable here, but in the future it may not be predictable, and it seems too random for somebody to just be gifted 1 point. I just felt it should have been a half a point to each player. But nevertheless, I wouldn't suggest taking Washington this week because potentially the game can get canceled and you're out of luck. And anybody that took Philly gets 1 point.
We're in a spot, too, where it's not only the Washington-Philly game, but L.A. has 18 COVID list players and counting. We're still not sure what the extent of that is going to be. The Giants now dealing with a pretty significant outbreak too, and how much that list has been climbing the last 3 to 4 hours. So there's a couple potential landmines, I guess, which helps us with ruling things out, because in terms of trying to predict the top 5 consensus, which we're starting early in the show this week because I think we need the extra time. We can save the recap for later. When it comes to just trying to sort of narrow this card down, I think there was the obvious choice, which stood out with Houston and how high that number was. But now we've seen this morning that number's moved a field goal after Urban Meyer was fired at 12:35 a.m. this morning. and then news drops. So that kind of torpedoed that. And now we're at just a huge number there. If I'm looking at just like spots that might not ultimately impact by COVID, the first one that probably stands out is this New England Indianapolis game, just because of how divisive it is on a Saturday night. Where do we even start here? Like, does anything stand out to you for a top 5 selection that's just clear cut, or are we going to have to go old fashioned here and game by game this?
Well, yeah, let's we know that tonight's game's not going to be on the list because that's
Right.
going to be divided and it's early. I don't think you can use the Cleveland game because you're facing the same problem there. I mean, if they lose any more players, they could potentially be in that situation.
That game's moved a touchdown,
and it's moved a lot. I would think people are going to stay away from that game, don't you?
I think so too, because there's so much uncertainty from Cleveland. The only thing that I could say is that the Raiders in general, despite their lack of performance the last month and a half, not dealing with nearly as many issues COVID and injury wise as Cleveland. So I don't know if there's going to be a willingness to take this at the absolute bottom of the market, just knowing how bad the situation is in Cleveland. But nobody's taking Cleveland at the bottom. I think it's a question of whether or not there's enough people that are willing to sort of just blindly go into battle here with the Raiders. But I mean, this game was 7 almost earlier in the week. So like the division between how different these teams are is pretty clear. But I would say it's Las Vegas or nothing.
You know what? And I kind of wonder if people think it's moved too much and Cleveland gets support. Nevertheless, I think it's a dog with fleas and it's a little bit early. The Indianapolis New England game probably garners a lot of selections. I'm not sure. I'm not sure which way they go though.
I think it's going to be a very popular side because, like, well, we were talking offline the last couple of weeks. You said you're upgrading the Patriots week after week after week. They're climbing up the ratings, 7 straight wins, 7 straight covers. But the professional support for Indianapolis week after week right now is enormous. And they're very divisive because of Carson Wentz at quarterback and the perception of what people have of him, but then also the other perception the professional bettors have where he's actually performing quite well from a numbers perspective. So I don't know which way they ultimately go, but I can see this game being circled as one that's going to get a lot of support for both sides. And it's also one of the few games this week where we haven't had the injury or COVID news that all these other games have had. So I think that is going to lead to like even extra selections on top of how divisive the handicap is.
Yeah, I think let's put that on the that game on the probable list. Let's skip past Washington, Philly. I think people need to stay away from that.
I think so too. It's too messy both ways.
Buffalo
Carolina,
is a possibility, wouldn't you think?
Well, the big question there is Josh Allen. So in the press conference yesterday, McDermott said it's up to him if he plays. And Allen said if he can go, he's going to go. But there was no commitment one way or the other. I will say if he plays, that number, like if he's announced in later today or tomorrow after Bills practice, that number is without a doubt going to increase. And so there's going to be value here versus where the market is versus the number in the contest.
I agree. And then the Giants-Miami, we saw the first COVID news hit with Waddle getting knocked out. That's knocked that line down this morning.
Came back against Miami, but that was that was like one-way action all week against the Jets in support of Miami. So we're kind of – it's a tricky spot there, I guess, but I would say that Miami's probably a consideration.
Okay, I agree. Dallas, the Giants?
Josh Allen, here's a video moving pretty well at practice. This was posted 2 minutes ago. So like we're dealing with a show here that is going on as other things are going on. Dallas and the Giants, like you mentioned, boy, I mean, that's, again, you're dealing with the COVID situation on the Giants. There's no way people are taking the points. Daniel Jones is not going to start. It's going to be a Glennon game. But are people going to lay that number with the Cowboys and the injury issues they have in the backfield?
I don't think so. Do we even have Green Bay, Baltimore on here? Oh, they do have it. Wow.
They do have it. So that's a game that we've seen go back and forth between basically 3 and 7 the entire week. So we're looking at a situation there where in the contest they went 5.5, so sort of a conservative number right in the middle. Now, if Lamar doesn't start, that game's going towards 7. If he does start, it's going towards 3. Where do you stand on that?
I think after what people saw happen with Baltimore with Jackson out last week, they may think that there's going to be some value with Baltimore. So, but it depends. I don't think they're going to announce whether he's in until late Saturday or Sunday morning, quite frankly. So I think we weed that game out.
I think so too. There's just so much uncertainty, but it's also, like you said, I think it's going to be a game time decision. Dead Money Media, who's been with us each and every week, he's been pretty spot on with the projections. Green Bay with Lamar could be popular. If he doesn't play and the news is announced before the deadline of the picks, there's no question that we're going to see that also starting. But on the same token, Jordan Love is taking all of the reps in practice. So Rodgers is, again, resting. He said he had the toe setback. I don't know at this point if that's actually a legitimate injury or if he's just overplaying it. I'm not downplaying the fact that he's probably hurt, but I feel like some of that is a little bit overblown.
It may be, but he likes the attention, so we don't know for sure.
Loves the attention. There's no question. I think that's playing into it a little bit. So, like, Green Bay's probably consideration, but at the same time, we just don't know with Lamar. So that brings us to Tennessee-Pittsburgh. So here's another game that's been moving all over the place. We've seen initial support for the Steelers bringing that down. We're looking at a contest number that's right on market, but where is this number ultimately going to settle by Sunday? This one's right now at a pick 'em.
Well, it's not going to surprise me to see it settle on the Pittsburgh side of things.
So numbers going to continue, you think, to come down? Is this going to swing through 0?
I think it's quite plausible.
And so at what point, with this being at a pick 'em, might there be interest on the other side with Tennessee?
I think Tennessee is the more attractive choice to the average person, don't you?
I think so too. And what's interesting here, so Circa's released these numbers obviously every morning on Thursday. This week, I give a ton of credit to Matt and Jeff and everyone in the back room. Chris, everyone's done a fantastic job with these numbers all season, dealing with all these issues. But they've gone low a couple of times sort of against the market. So I think it sort of tips their hand in where they're expecting the number to go. And if I'm looking at the board right now, there's Circuit, Pick, and then there's a couple offshore places that are at Pick'em as well. But for the most part, everybody still has Tennessee as like a 1-point favorite on the board. And so there could be people that see this at least now and think they're getting some value. And I think Tennessee is the more attractive side. But if this sort of adjustment that Circa's taken with the contest lines is an indication of where the market is going to go, there's a chance that this, I think, swings towards Pittsburgh, like you said, and then people are really looking at Tennessee as value.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one to consider. Houston, Jacksonville, at this point, I think people may just want to sit that out at that number. It would have been different at the 3.5.
If Meyer was still in, I think Houston would have been a very popular choice at 3.5. But now that he's out, like, it's the classic handicapping spot. We've seen professional support this morning on Jacksonville. So I think that kind of negates it a little bit. And nobody's running to take Jacksonville at 5.5 against anyone, even without Meyer.
And so I think the Lions are always in play. I mean, they're one of the most profitable teams this season, betting wise.
So there we go. So that's a lot of points. Hopkins is now potentially needing surgery. His season is over. Everyone saw Arizona struggle against the Rams on Monday Night Football. Detroit gets the win, held in a little bit of a different light. But last week against the Broncos, they had nobody on the field. They were dealing with non-COVID issues, but just a flu that went through the locker room. So at 12.5, like you mentioned, I think that's probably pretty appealing to bettors.
Yeah, I think that's worth considering.
Falcons, Niners, San Francisco 9.5-point favorites. It's been bet up. The Niners are getting bet every week. I think we like them at an earlier number. I think we've both bet them, but in the contest now at 9.5, that changes things.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty divided. I've heard a lot of people on Atlanta, but I think that's going to be kind of a divided. I'd lean toward more people on Atlanta, though.
I think at this number for sure. Cincinnati, Denver, Broncos 2.5-point favorites. Are the Bengals intriguing here to anybody?
I think they are. I think they're worth considering. I don't think there's a believer in either of these teams. So when in doubt, take the points.
I think the points are going to be the more popular side. Are we putting Cincy on the potential consideration here?
Yep.
Seattle, LA, as mentioned, the Rams dealing with the COVID issue. They've got now 17 or 18 players on the list. That number continues to grow. This is down to 4.5. It was 7. Where do we go from here? What are we thinking about at this point?
I think you have to ignore. I mean, you've got a COVID situation there where things could get out of hand potentially.
Are we putting it on the side, or are we going to give Seattle potential consideration?
No, I don't think people are going to bite on Seattle.
Saints, Buccaneers. Now, interesting price here. The Bucs get a big win against Buffalo in overtime. The Saints beat the Jets. From a matchup perspective, there's a lot here to support the Buccaneers having a lot of success on both sides of the ball, especially with Taysom Hill's finger in the state it is and how you need to pass to attack that secondary. But this is a much bigger number that we're seeing the Bucs lay in a game that they lost outright earlier in the year to a Saints team that had quarterback issues of their own that game, especially in the second half after Jameis went down. So what are we looking at here with this big of a number?
Well, the Saints have their number, so that just seems like a lot of points. So
it's not a game that you feel that there's just like overwhelming support for Tampa Bay, despite how well they've played. That's the impression that I get.
Yeah, I think you absolutely get more people on the Saints on here for sure. It's just a matter of whether it would be enough to make the top 5.
Do they get 1,000 or not is sort of the question. So we have a couple more games that we're going to look at. Well, we're at Minnesota, Chicago, Monday Night Football. Now, that one from a contest line perspective at 3.5, we've seen this morning. Even Circa themselves went to 4. The Vikings took some pro money this morning. That number bumped up. So this is probably going to be the game that maybe isn't fully impacted by everything else, at least not yet to this point. But with the line value sort of standing out here with this game at 4 everywhere in the market, I don't know if we see market support from bettors for the Bears at any point this week, considering how that defense has completely fell apart the last few weeks. That was the one strong point. Are the Vikings consideration at a number that's going to be lower than market?
I don't think they're going to get enough people interested in the game.
Just because it's a Monday night, or just because of the matchup being in the division?
I just think it's one of those games that is not going to. I think there's going to just be more interesting lines available to people.
Interesting. So I would say that maybe at 3.5 there's consideration. Is it worth sort of weighing that against these other games that we've highlighted?
I don't think so. I don't think it's going to be popular enough.
The full rule out. Okay. So we're skipping that one, which leaves us, if we look back, we have 2, 4, 6, 7 sides to saw down and get into our top 5. So first question that I think we have to decide. New England, Indianapolis, Thursday night game. We know it's going to be popular. We know it's not impacted by any news or COVID yet. I say that I ultimately may be jinxing it. We think it's going to be a very divisive game. We think it's going to be popular. Does one side take more than the other? Or are we in consideration for both making the top 5 in a popular game that's sort of relatively clean?
I think New England takes more picks.
New England takes more. Okay, so we'll put New England in the 5, and I would agree with you, despite having a financial interest myself in Indianapolis, but I agree with you because I think the streak that the Pats are on and how we've now seen sort of in prime time in a game that everyone's watching, how it looked. And I think people really buy into Belichick and the control he has and sort of the dominance he has within, like, that to me came back very quickly. We went from last year, he lost it and all these questions, and now it's like, it's back, we've got it. And I think that matters to a lot of people. So I'm with you saying I think New England at 2 is going to be top 5.
I think so.
So that brings us to Miami, New York. As you mentioned, Waddle hits the COVID list. That's obviously impactful to the Dolphins offense. They're laying a big number, but the Jets have injury concerns both sides of the football. We've seen nothing but professional support for the Dolphins this week. At 9.5, less than 10, are they a big favorite that makes the top 5? Your exact noise that you just made expresses my entire opinion about this week.
Boy, it's right there at the edge. I think let's get a few more teams in first and come back to that. I think Tennessee is going to be popular.
I'm with you too. Tennessee at pick is going to be very popular. So we'll put that in the top 5 along New England. That leaves us with Detroit, Cincinnati, and New Orleans.
I think Detroit's going to be popular.
I'm with you. I wasn't initially there as I was sort of looking at the board before we came on air. But as we talk about it, I think Detroit makes a lot of sense to be a popular side, especially with the Hopkins injury.
I think we missed some major news here.
That's 3, so we're doing well. Cincinnati, New Orleans are the last 2 that we circled. You said there's breaking news?
Yeah, we must be missing something because the Minnesota game just went nuts.
It's being bet up even further, isn't it?
It's at 4.5 now.
Yep. So that's either a position or there's news. It's going to be like this the rest of the season. Producer Brady is on it. So that 3.5 now is definitely going to be short. So does that bring Minnesota now back into consideration with that value?
Yeah.
Top 5 worthy if we're going to see something that's 2 points off?
Yeah. I think so, don't you?
Yep, I think so too. And we're seeing that happen the screen I just pulled up the screen and it is going nuts. So that's being bet everywhere. So Minnesota's in at 4th. So that leaves us with Miami, Cincinnati, and New Orleans as the other 3 games that we identified. I'm tempted with Miami.
I can't fault any of those 3, quite frankly.
Cincinnati, Denver, I'm thinking about the opponents here. So to a bet on the Saints in the contest is a bet against the Buccaneers, who are the best team in football. A bet on Cincinnati is a bet against the Denver Broncos, who I think a handful of professionals, now that roster's healthy, see a lot of value in, which is why we're seeing them get bet often. But I don't know if that's fully shared throughout the entire contest. And probably why I would lead Miami is because a pick on Miami is a pick against the Jets. So of these 3 teams, to me, the weakest opponent by far is the Jets within this contest.
Okay, let's go with Miami.
Now, we're putting ourselves in a bit of a pickle here because obviously that Waddle COVID outbreak could turn into a lot more. We don't know at this point. So it's sort of the downside.
We can only go with the information we have at the time. That's the problem each week.
Exactly. So top 5, New England, Tennessee, Detroit, Minnesota, and Miami. I actually feel pretty good about that, but I say that every single week.
Yeah. I think last week was our worst week, wasn't it?
No, we got 2. We're consistently 2 and 3. It's the opposite of me in the actual Circa Million contest. I believe it's 9 weeks in a row I've gone 3 and 2. And I've been a point or a point and a half out of the money since about week 8. And I have not been able to pick up ground. I've sort of maintained it with all these other people that are right around, and I've seen names shuffle up and down. But it's just week by week, by continuing to go 3 and 2, a few more drop off every single week. I started a tie for 400th, and I'm now into a tie for 120th. And so it's just the number keeps getting smaller, but I can't make up any ground.
Well, you'll be okay. Just keep, believe it or not, you'll probably be okay at 3 and 2 because things are going to get goofy these last 4 weeks for people because you're going to get a lot of people that do goofy things. They're going to be thinking about the money, and
you've said it all season. Just stay steady and stay focused on your picks. I've taken that to heart.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at the top 5, I think we're pretty set there. You've got the 2-game lead with 4 weeks to go. So a win here for you could almost seal it. Puts me in a tough spot where I'm playing for the tie, and nobody likes to split the bill on a steak dinner. So if we do get to that spot, we might have to add a bonus point for week 18. But I get first pick this week, as you took it last week. So gives me a bit of an advantage to bring this down to a 1-game lead with 3 to play instead of going the other way. But I think this is the toughest week we've had to pick a top in a very long time. I'm inclined. I think I have to go Tennessee. Was that what you were thinking too?
That would no. I think I'm going to get my number 1 choice,
which was Detroit.
No, I'm going to go with New England.
Interesting. Okay. I think people in the contest pay attention to the market and how it moves, and I think this move this week's been telling. But I'm okay. I'm okay going up against New England with Tennessee in terms of who's going to be the most selected in the contest this week. I feel good with that. I can cut it to a game lead. I think we're going to have a 1-game lead with 3 to play. That'll be interesting. So we actually worked through the top 5 relatively well. That game-by-game approach worked. I don't think we left anything out. We covered a lot there.
I think it was easy to exclude a bunch of games, quite frankly, which makes it a little bit easier.
It helps for sure. Now, of course, there's always the last order of business to get to, which is the Survivor. Last week, as we were anticipating, a lot of folks would go to the Denver Broncos. We ended up being very on the spot with that. This week, there's a lot of big favorites, which probably to me is a little bit less interesting of a discussion compared to what we're going to get into next week with the Christmas Day games and that short week, which will add some extra excitement. But to me, this week, in terms of where people are going to go on Sunday, it sort of just comes down to availability, and folks are going to be picking a big favorite. I don't think there's too much to really dive into.
No, I don't think there is. And there's just too many variables this week for sure. So
it's all going to happen late.
Yeah, you're not going to know till Saturday what the real choices are here.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And like we could speculate on a big favorite. I don't know if it's ultimately going to matter. It's going to be pretty spread out unless there's news that sort of dictates one is more valuable than the other. So I think we'll leave the big Survivor discussion to next week, where it is the Thursday and Saturday combination that gets really interesting, because to me, I'm gonna spoil it a little bit. The Colts were sort of that standout pick to me of people wanting to go potentially against the grain, as we saw on Thanksgiving, where people trying to pick that early game, Detroit, Chicago, to sort of get that underdog and survive. But nobody remaining has the Colts left. So there's 0 people that can sort of swerve and ultimately take the Colts. So that one obvious sort of contrarian side to others within the contest, taking the Colts as a dog, is not an option for anybody. So I'm curious to see how that might impact some strategy this week with those other 5 teams that people can ultimately select.
Boy, that's going to be. Oh, nobody can take Indy. That's okay.
Nobody can take Indy. And it's a weird set of circumstances, because I think Arizona is not going to be an appealing favorite, especially with Hopkins. We're already seeing that number get crushed in the look-ahead market. And then you have San Fran, Tennessee, which is the ultimate pick'em game. And then you have Cleveland, Green Bay, and only one person has Cleveland left. So it's tough to go either direction there. So people are going to be forced to the favorites.
Yeah, I don't think you were going to get anybody on Cleveland at this point anyway there.
No, exactly. So people are going to be sort of forced to go to the favorites, which they've been saving, which if you're forced to take Arizona, like I don't feel comfortable about that as a favorite in any way, which makes me wonder if we're going to see people go to Arizona this week and ultimately burn that option for next week.
Yeah, that's a really cool week. I got to tell you, that's a really cool Survivor week, frankly.
I don't know if we've ever seen probably the most appealing pick of a Survivor week being an underdog, but then nobody being able to take that underdog. That's a unique scenario.
I think you're going to have people that are going to be happy to take San Francisco, and I think you're going to, yeah, you can't take Indy, so I think San Francisco will get some play next week for sure.
I think they have to, because only 4 people remaining have Tennessee as an option. So there's all of a sudden a lot of limitations on where people can go when it comes to it. The numbers were mixed up. Tennessee has 19, Tampa Bay has 4. Tampa Bay not playing on Christmas. So there's 19 available for Tennessee. So people may be forced into picking that early game, which is going to be the ultimate pick 'em game.
And what's so frustrating in that situation without having a big favorite is you can't hedge with some big money line to kind of have savor there. I mean, you got to really lay it out there.
Yep, you're kind of forced to options, but we'll dive into that Thursday. It's going to be interesting to see how many people burn Arizona this week, looking ahead to next week, as the Cardinals are the biggest favorite on the board right now. But next week, they're sort of in that undesirable situation against the Colts, who continue to get professional support. So that's going to be an interesting breakdown. But I think we're going to do well with the top 5. I say it every week, but I've got a good feeling about this one. He is LVC. I am Adam Chernoff. We'll be back with you next Thursday for the football betting contest countdown. And be sure to check in Saturday during both of the primetime games for Halftime Live. We'll see you next Thursday.